you so much. Hello everyone. Hello everybody. I'm really grateful that you invited me to come to Ljubljana, and at the same time I'm very, very sorry that I wasn't able to be there in person. It's because of some personal serious issues that forced me to stay in Poland in October. But the more I'm sorry for not being personally, I'm more grateful that I have this opportunity to speak to you online, despite all the troubles it may cause to the organizers and also to you as an audience. I know that listening to someone speaking from the screen is not so nice as being in a performative chain of interaction in the same room. I will share my presentation because it would be not so very nice, and I think it would be rather dull for you to look only at my face. I hope that you see the presentation now. Here is the title of my lecture, also my contacts. If anyone would like to contact me, please do on the email of my university, academic university. So, as Thomas said, my lecture will be devoted to Jerzyju Grotowski. Oh, sorry, I'm not able to. Why I'm not able to show you next slide? This is the problem. Sorry, it's not working. Oh, okay. Maybe here something. Okay, here it is.
Is it okay? Okay, thank you.
Yes, it's okay. It's okay. I just need to look for the arrow. So, as you see, the hero of my lecture is Jerzy Grotowski, the mostly famous as a theater director, but in fact, only a smaller part of his artistic career was devoted to theater, because in 1969, 1970, Grotowski announced that he was not going to work on theater anymore, and for the last 25, 40 years of his life, he was doing something else. At the end of his life, he called his work an art as vehicle, and he also said that it's belonging to the domain of research that he called performing arts. So he should be considered a theater director and a creator of performing arts pieces, let's say. And also, of course, he's most famous as an artist working with actors and performers with a special method that he himself was neglecting, because it's a method. So, but the work with actors, this is something that Grotowski is mostly famous. I'm researching Grotowski, I have been researching Grotowski for about 20 years now. I wrote 3 books devoted to him, but the most important thing I did, I must come back, sorry, I did was to be an editor, or one of editors, of a huge volume of Grotowski's collected text that we published in Poland in 2012. There is also an Italian edition, and soon there will be a French edition. We are discussing for years now an English one, but I do hope that in several next years also the English edition of collected texts will appear, and everyone interested will be able to read Grotowski's text. And I'm quite convinced that this is the way to get closer to the ideas and also practices of Grotowski, who was a very talented writer and very talented, let's say, storyteller, many times performing himself as a lecturer, as a leader of discussion, and so on and so on. Of course, Grotowski is considered to be one of the leading figures of theater avant-garde of 20th century. And I'm quite sure that as unique he was, maybe you remember the famous words of Peter Brook from his introduction to Towards a Pole Theatre. The introduction starts with the sentence, "Grotowski is unique." Grotowski was unique, but at the same time he was also an epitome of some of processes, developments, also problems connected with theater arts, performing arts in 20th century. I think also that in his work, in his text, in his achievements, in his research, he touched a lot of issues that we are also fighting with now. So I think it's quite inspirational to come back to Grotowski, to read him again and again. Some aspects of his practice, some of his aspects of his research were not so clearly taken during his life, but now we may reinterpret them and get some really new inspirations and really strong inspirations from his self. One of the aspects of Grotowski's life was his relation to historical avant-garde. He himself considered to be an unofficial heir of Konstantin Stanislavski. From 70s, Grotowski claimed that he is continuing what Stanislavski was researching, but Stanislavski stopped because he died, and Grotowski started his research from the point where Stanislavski stopped it. And it's also true that in Grotowski's texts and also in some texts of his important collaborators like Ludwig Flaschen, one may find many opinions, many statements expressing kind of distance between the work of Grotowski and the avant-garde. Let me quote just one. This is a quote from a quite important and seminal essay by Ludwig Flaschen, tellingly titled After Avant-Garde, in which, as you see, Flaschen says that we are not so much avant-garde, but rather arrière-garde. We are not interested in something radically new, in some future developments. We are rather interested in something that is archaic, that it's very, very ancient, old, connected to roots, sources, and so on and so on. Also, Grotowski repeated such claims many times, especially when he was internationally famous in the late 60s and 70s. Also, his one of his last most important speeches that was published as a short, very dense text titled Performer. Grotowski at the very beginning said, "I do not want to discover what's new, but what was forgotten." So he was saying, I'm rather looking for some ancient knowledge, and I'm giving it back to you, and maybe it's your fault that you think that it's an avant-garde idea. Grotowski, during the last years of his life, very often performed himself as an old guru, old wisdom man who is bringing to modern people some ancient gnosis, some ancient knowledge. But it's his figure from his elder times. When he was young, he rather claimed that he continues the work of the theater avant-garde, the interwar period. For him, especially important was to study the work of Всеволод Meyerhold. Grotowski spent a year in Moscow, let's say half a year in Moscow, and during this time he studied the archives of Meyerhold and learned a lot. And it's really easy to see an influence of Meyerhold's theater, especially of Meyerhold's work as dramaturg and director, on Grotowski's early performances. Here you have some slides from rather forgotten production by Grotowski based on Johann Wolfgang Goethe's Faust, staged not in the Theatre of 30 Rows, but in Repertoire Theatre in Poznan. And as you see, the performing machine is a kind of quote, or rather maybe reinterpretation of what Meyerhold used as performing machines in his in his productions. So younger Grotowski was strictly connected to the avant-garde, and you can find many of his claims in which he admits it. He speaks about Meyerholz, he speaks about Polish avant-garde artists like Stanisław Ignacy-Witkiewicz, like Witold Gombrowicz. I think that he was also very well informed about some achievements of such important Polish avant-garde theaters as Krakow Theatre Kriko, not the second Kriko, but the first one, pre-war Kriko, active in the late 30s. And he also had some contacts with representatives, important figures of Central European theatre avant-garde. For example, in the 1950s, Grotowski participated in a seminar of Emil Franciszek-Burian, the famous Czech avant-gardist. It was one of the last seminars that Burian led. Grotowski took part in it. So there is a dense web of links, inspirations, influences between the pre-war historical avant-garde and Grotowski's theatre and Grotowski's research. There is something to be studied in detail, and I hope that someday maybe I myself or someone else will present a deep study of these inspirations, partly hidden by Grotowski himself. From a certain point, Grotowski was not so eager to admit that he was inspired by the pre-war avant-garde. As I said, he would rather present himself as someone who got some very ancient knowledge and now he is coming with it to the modern world. From this dense web of relations, I would just like for today took one thread, the one that the conference is devoted to, so the relation between center and periphery, and I would try to outline the tactics Grotowski used to play with the dynamics between center and periphery. I'm using the word tactics, not strategies, following the idea of Michel Desserteau and his understanding of tactics as ways used by the people who are deprived of power, who are not ruling over a certain domain, but are rather trying to cope with rules forced upon them by authorities, by others. And I think that this is the situation in which Grotowski was. He was not the one, at least to a certain point of his career, he was not the one who had a power to recompose the net of relations, the net of the set of rules ruling the cultural policy. So he was rather using tactics to cope with situation. I will try to present these basic tactics more or less in a chronological way, following the biography of Grotowski, also because he was a man who changed his way of behavior, his look, the model of his performance many times. So it's much more easier to follow all these tactics when they are presented in a chronological way. We need to start from childhood, and it's quite important because Grotowski was born in a periphery of today's Poland. And he spent his childhood, as he himself admitted, his formative years in a very small village called Minadówka, in the eastern part of Poland. Of course, this was during the Second World War, so they left bigger towns, and there are no big towns in this part of Poland, so they left towns and somehow hidden themselves in a village to protect. Grotowski's mother took him and his brother to the village to protect them from the horrors of war. In the 70s, when Grotowski was famous and started to develop a special project called Theatre of Sources. He many times returned to these years of his childhood, and he admitted that these were the crucial years of his life, that living in this peripheral small village, he discovered some very, very basic concepts, some basic ideas, also some practices and traditions that he later was to develop. And here I need to observe and underline a very special cultural phenomenon that is important to the whole history of Polish culture. I mean a phenomenon that is called in Polish kresy, more or less in English it's borderlands. And it's a name given to the eastern part of former Polish Empire that in 16th and 17th centuries tried to become a regional power, mainly competing with Russia. To get this position, finally, as you know, Poland lost this fight. But in the 16th and 17th centuries, especially after the union between Kingdom of Poland and Lithuania and creation of so-called two nations republic, Poland was a huge country with a vast land in eastern part that very soon became a kind of myth. It may be a simplification, but you may compare this myth of Kresy or Polish borderlands with American myth of Wild West. The similarities are, of course, there are many differences, but there are some important similarities, as in the American culture. Also in Polish one, the borderlands were the domain of traditional communities living in their traditional ways. It was the domain of strong people, strong women and men who are following their strong emotions, who are passionate, who are not civilized in a way that the people living in cities are civilized, who are true, real, who follow their true emotions, who are sincere. Of course, sometimes they are cruel, sometimes they are violent, but even the violence is something that comes from the heart. So there is a myth of these borderlands working in Polish culture, and to some degree still is working as a kind of borderland nostalgia. And it created a very specific situation for Polish culture in which the center is a place of falsehood, is a place of false civilization following certain rules, customs, and behaviors that were forced upon people, while peripheries are the lands and the domains of true experiences, of true knowledge, and of true revelation. It may be observed especially in the period of Romanticism that for Polish culture is absolutely crucial. Two of the main poets and I would say spiritual leaders of nation, Adam Mickiewicz and Jerzyju Grotowski, came from borderlands. Mickiewicz was born in today's Belarus and was raised in today's Lithuania. Grotowski was born and raised in today's Ukraine. They both came to the centers. In case of Mickiewicz, it was not center of Poland even, it was center of Russia, because Mickiewicz was sent to St. Petersburg, then he went to Rome and Paris, while Grotowski was first attacking, let's say, Warsaw and then Paris, London and Rome. These artists were empowering this myth of borderlands, peripheries, as the land of sources from which a special artist with a special knowledge, with special talents, may bring some ancient truth to the center, transforming them and somehow saving the centers from the false values in which they are living. And the same pattern, partly, at least partly, worked in Grotowski's biography. He was born in eastern town of Przemyśl, still in the borders of Poland, but very close to Ukraine. Then he was raised in this small village of Niemandówka, and later moved to the town called Rzeszów. But he, all this time, from his youth, he was convinced that if you would like to look for some sources, for some roots, for some older tradition, for some true methods, true ways of, true sources of creation, you need to go to peripheries. Even in the 70s, when he discovered Haitian culture, he traveled to Haiti, he brought some Haitian people to Poland, to Europe, he studied voodoo also practically. It was also an expression of this pattern of looking for sources on peripheries, not in the centers. Coming back to his biography, we can really quite easily observe a model of such a biography of a guy who was born in periphery, in the province, and who is step by step advancing from the provincial, peripheral place to the center. First, because he moved from Niemandówka to Rzeszów. It's a, let's say, local center for this eastern part of Poland, but it was in this time, and partly still is, quite a provincial center, let's say. Then he moved to Krakow, and of course, advancing from Rzeszów to Krakow was a kind of social investment so that was quite typical for the time. First 10, 20 years after the war, many people from provincial towns, from villages, from remote parts of Poland were moving to cities, because cities were giving them a chance to become richer, more important, and so on, also for the educational purposes. So Grotowski moved from Rzeszów to Krakow. It's quite important because Krakow, where I'm also working, is an old Polish capital and a town that considers itself to be still the most important and most culturally advanced center in Poland. And there is also a special ethos of Krakowian intelligentsia. It's not so welcoming to the people from province coming to town. So I think that Grotowski also felt it somehow. But being in Krakow, he felt himself as a kind of newcomer, as an outsider who tries to get to the center. Of course, he was quite lucky because he studied in the Theatre Academy, and Theatre Academy, of course, is a kind of elitist academy. Not everyone is admitted, so he became a kind of elite. And at the very beginning of his life, this model of biography of someone who is coming from province and is advancing and getting closer and closer to the center, may be easily observed. After graduating from Theatre Academy, Grotowski started a very promising career in old theatre in Krakow, and this was the time when the old theatre, despite its name, was starting to become one of the most important centers of contemporary Polish theatre. Also, Krakow again started to be a very dynamic vortex of cultural innovations. Tadeusz Kantor organized Kriko 2. There were several important theatre companies working in Krakow. So Krakow was the place to be for the young director. Grotowski, following a logic of a career, Grotowski should stay there. Working in old theatre, and soon he would probably become one of the leading figures of this movement. But he decided otherwise. In 1959, Grotowski decided to leave Kraków for provincial town of Opole, in which he was appointed to be a director, artistic director of a very small theater called Theater of 30 Rows. This theater was not a professional one, not known to anyone. Also, Opole was a provincial town in a very specific situation because before the war, before the Second World War, Opole was a German town. And after the war, thousands of its inhabitants were forced to leave for Germany. New people came to the town. So it was a kind of town that was recreated, reconstructed anew after the disaster of the Second World War. And this was one of the reasons why Grotowski left. When later he explained why he moved to Opole, he said, I needed to start from scratch. I invited young people with no professional experience to work with me in this small theater. And the other thing was that this was a provincial town far from any attractions of bigger cities. So there was no TV center, there was no film industry, there was just one professional state theater working in Opole. So these young actors, there was almost no nightlife also. So these young actors had nothing more to do than to focus on the work. And this was what Grotowski wanted from them. He wanted them to be focused on the work, on the work, and this way he started his laboratory work in theater. But at the same time, we need to remember that Grotowski was to find a way of building the relations between authorities of his town, of Opole, and of building his own position in the cultural life of the country. So he started to play a special game with the centrum periphery dynamics. On one hand, he performed in Opole as a representative of a very special, experimental, innovative, avant-garde art that maybe is not done for Opole. Maybe for the people from Opole it's too sophisticated. They may not understand what Grotowski and his actors are doing, but Opole should be proud because there are important cultural centers that consider the work to be very, very valuable. So he, while in Opole, Grotowski performed someone who works there but presents his work and is looking for some reception in the centers, and of course many times he used these tactics of convincing local authorities and local publicity that the centers are really valuing his work. One of the elements of this game is very, very funny from today's perspective, but it was quite important by the time, was a presence of people coming from the West. One of the most important the most important one was now famous director and theater theoretician, leader of AVANT-GARDES, who came to Poland in early 60s and by chance came to Opole and met Grotowski and got fascinated with his work. Barbara put a lot of effort to promote Grotowski abroad, in Italy, in France. Later, many of theater laboratory's successes were because of the work Eugenio done. But the truth also is that even his very presence in Opole in late 60s, in early 60s, it was something incredible. Small provincial Polish town welcomed beautiful, charming young Italian who stayed there for months because of Grotowski's theater. It was something really incredible, very attractive. Many people were convinced that the theater is so important because someone from the mythical West came to this small Polish town to watch the theater. We need to remember that by the time Polish citizens, as much of the citizens of the socialist countries, were not allowed to go freely abroad, especially to the West. And also the guests from West were not so common as today. So this exotic bird coming to the dull provincial town of Opole was a very important proof that Grotowski is someone, and we need to be proud of his work, even if we don't understand what he's doing at all. Later, when Grotowski became famous and he moved to Wrocław, to another town in western part of Poland, bigger one, he used these tactics during his career. He was promoting his international tours, all the reviews that were positive. There was special information in the radio, in media, repeating all the time that Grotowski is so important to the world, that he is internationally recognized, and so on and so on. And it really worked on the level of this time peripheral, provincial Polish authorities, both in Opole, in Wrocław, and also in central government. Grotowski's success is partly due to his ability to convince the central culture authorities, both of government and the party, that he is the one to be promoted outside Poland as a proof of cultural freedom in the country. And it really worked, because even in the West there were many commentaries saying that yeah, we are not able to have such important artists here in our countries, but in communist Poland, Grotowski may work freely, he gets subsidy from the state, and so on and so on. So this is one part of his tactics, to convince local peripheral authorities that the centers are interested in him, that for the centers he is important. The other part of this tactics is devoted to Grotowski presenting himself in the centers as someone who is coming from peripheries, where the real work is done. That centers are not the places of real values, of real work, that if you are interested in real work, you need to go to peripheries. And just in short, I will outline these tactics in relation between Grotowski and Polish capital, Warsaw. When Grotowski for the first time presented his work in Warsaw in 1960, they were criticized, they were laughed upon, and they were received as the representatives of a false experiment. So for many, many years, Grotowski didn't come back to Warsaw. He became famous. He was famous in Paris, in Italy, in United States, but he had never performed in Warsaw. Only in 1972, after presenting the second version of Apocalyptis Configuris, first in London, then in Paris, Grotowski came to Warsaw, and he used a very special tactics towards the publics. They performed in a very small venue, admitting only small number of people, and only few performances were addressed to the normal audience. So one could buy a ticket for the performance. Most of the performances were for the publics that were invited by Grotowski and his colleagues, and they were looking for these spectators, not in cultural centers, but on the streets, in student clubs, in the cafes. They were looking for young people looking a little bit like hippies, people who were looking like rebels, like outsiders, and they invited them to watch apocalyptic movies. And for Warsaw culture elite, it was a shock that somebody like Grotowski came to Warsaw, came to the center, but performed that he's not interested in becoming a part of a mainstream, that he's rather attacking the center to take someone who is feeling like an inner outsider and to invite these inner outsiders to join him to work truly, and the true work should be done in periphery. Later in 1970s, when Grotowski became internationally famous, the relation between center and periphery was further deconstructed. To put it in very simple words, in very short words, because I know my time is coming to the end, I would say that in the 1970s, Grotowski became a moving center. He was traveling all over the world, was invited for almost each theater festival or theater conference would like to have Grotowski in the program. So he could choose from many invitations, and he traveled around the world. In fact, in some moments, no one knew where he is. So he was moving around the world like a moving center. He, to use the phrase of John Mackenzie from many years later, Grotowski became a liminautic artist, someone who is traveling all the time, who is a kind of trickster. No one knew where he would appear and what he would do. So he focused the interest on himself, and he was also able to create centers. For example, in 1975, I put the wrong date on the slide, sorry. 1975, he organized a very interesting festival called the Theatre of Nations University of Research in Wrocław, to which he invited Peter Brook, Luca Ronconi, Andre Gregory, Eugenio Barba, and organized many workshops, seminars, theatre presentations for thousands of people. It was Andre Gregory who called it Woodstock of theatre. And this was the proof that Grotowski as an artist had the power to create the center of his own. He was the one who created centers, and the stable culture capitals followed him, tried to attract him. He was no longer the one who was forced to come to a center. It changed in 1980s, it is short, when Grotowski was forced to leave Poland after declaration of martial law in Poland in 1981. Grotowski was no longer able to work in Poland the way he used to. So he left Poland, went first to United States, when he worked in a remote university in California, Irvine. University is not remote, but the part of the university, part of the campus in which Grotowski worked was quite, let's say, peripheral. But then in 1985 he moved to Italy and started what I would like to call the performance of Hermitage. Grotowski was, in the 80s, became quite seriously ill, so he was not able to travel as much as he did before. He was not performing himself so often as before. His presence was rather diminishing, and if one could say that in 1970s there was an over-presence of Jerzy Grotowski, in 1980s and 1990s it was rather an over-absence. He was mainly absent, he was not there. And there was a whole strategy of creating an image of Grotowski as hermit, living in some remote part of Italy, working in a small village called Vallicelle, where you cannot get by any public transport. You need to go on foot from the town of Pontedera, and there was a whole legend that you need to get on the special expedition to meet Grotowski there in his mythical Hermitage in Vallicelle. But Vallicelle is only 5 kilometers from a small industrial town called Pontedera in Tuscany, which is not so, I would say, provincial. Of course, it's not a center, but still, Pontedera is only 10 minutes by train from Pisa and only half an hour by train from Florence. And from there, you can easily get to any part of the world you want. So it's not a remote part of the world. It's not that Grotowski was an hermit somewhere there in the desert. He was in the middle of Europe. He was quite easily, he was able to get easily to any part of the world he wanted. Also, in Pontedera, he was invited to Pontedera by Carla Porastrelli and Roberto Bacci, who created there a center for experimental theater, Teatro Era. And in late 70s, Teatro Era became one of the most important centers of so-called third theater, an alternative theater developed from the inspiration of Eugenio Barba. So there were many companies, independent companies coming to Pontedera, like Living Theater, Bread and Puppet, of course, Odin Theater, also many people from former laboratory theater, public laboratory theater worked there. There were special festivals, meetings with practitioners from Asia, from all over the world. So it was a center of experimental and innovative theater research. And Grotowski was part of it. So he was not an hermit in the sense that he is far, far away from everything. He was rather performing himself as someone who is who is on periphery. Also because I think that he started to feel that his research is no longer central to what is going on in the cultural life and theater life of Europe. He was central figure of performing arts in the 70s, but from 1980s he was no longer the one. He was someone working in periphery. And I think that he himself liked this situation, and that he performed the situation and powered it. It's interesting that he organized his company and called it Work Center of Jerzy Grotowski, later renamed as the Work Center of Jerzy Grotowski and Thomas Richards. So you have the word center, but it's not a work center, it's a work center. It's a center of real work that needs to be far from what the world calls central. To work in a real permanent way, you need to leave center and stay away, stay in periphery, and only from there you need to attack centers, you need to inspire centers, you need to influence centers. So his whole life, I also had some examples from the 70s, but I don't want to prolong this lecture too much. His whole life, Grotowski was aware, this is very important, he was aware of the power, the dynamics between periphery and center. Generally, he preferred to be away, he preferred not to stay in centers, because he was convinced that only in peripheries you are able to work in a real way. You can achieve something real, concrete, practical. But also he knew that to get subsidies, to get some recognition that enables your work, you need to perform yourself in the center. There is a quite common notion that Grotowski was directing, he was writing, speaking about his work, but he was not performing himself. There are some accusations saying that Grotowski forced actors to perform, but he was not performing himself. I don't think it's true. I think that Grotowski also performed himself, and mainly he did it in the sentence that his performance, the performance of him as an artist, the work on creation a special image of a special artist was done for the centers, at the same time to protect the work peripheries and promote it as something hidden, something that you need to look for. You need to take a journey, an expedition, you need to take an effort to get to the periphery, to the hidden territory, where you may meet the master and work with him, then maybe coming back to the center. It's just an outline. I thought that I managed to stick to the half-an-hour frame. I was not able to do it. I'm very sorry. If you still have some time for questions, I would be more